Some Royal Caribbean cruise ships come and go, but their legacy stays with us forever. Today, we're going back in time to talk about why some Royal Caribbean cruise ships had to be sold. Up next. Hey everyone, it's Matt from RoyalCaribbeanBlog.com, and today we're taking a look at some of the Royal Caribbean cruise ships that have been sold and are now long gone from Royal Caribbean and why. You know, all cruise ships have a lifespan to them, and eventually they may or may not stay in the fleet longer than other ships, and there's a variety of reasons why that may be the case. If you cruise long enough, sooner or later, one or two Royal Caribbean cruise ships you sail on is likely to be sold. There are a lot of reasons why cruise ships get sold after all, and at the time, it may make a lot of sense. Looking back on it, some decisions to sell cruise ships made a lot of sense, others not so much. But today I wanted to talk about which Royal Caribbean cruise ships have been sold and why, and kind of go back a little bit in time. So strap in, we're going to go in the Wayback Machine, all the way back to 2020. Yeah, we're going back a year ago, because that's where our story begins, when Royal Caribbean sold actually two of its ships. Now, a lot of cruise ships, you may recall, were being sold in 2020. A number of lines, including Carnival especially, sold a number of ships. And by selling, I'm really talking about selling to scrapyards because they were being just dismantled. Of course, as you all remember, I'm sure, because it wasn't that long ago, we had the whole COVID-19 pandemic and the cruise industry was shut down. And as the industry was shut down for more than just a month and just kept going and going and going, cruise lines were looking for ways to drum up money. After all, a lot of the cruise lines quickly found themselves without cash because the nature of the cruise industry at that point was essentially to, have enough cash on hand to, maintain operations for a little while, but essentially new cash flow from new bookings and new cruises would kind of supplement it all, and it just worked. But if you don't have a business to operate for more than, 1 or 2 months, you're kind of left without any cash flow, and quickly cruise lines had to take bank loans out, and some lines turned to selling their ships. Now, Royal Caribbean held back from selling and just scrapping ships automatically. In fact, a number of lines did this initially, and Royal Caribbean did not go about that. But they eventually did sell two of their ships, and that was Empress of the Seas and Majesty of the Seas. So right around mid-December 2020, Royal Caribbean announced in a joint statement that Majesty of the Seas and Empress of the Seas were being sold to an undisclosed party in the Asia-Pacific region. It was later uncovered the new owner of Empress of the Seas is India-based cruise line startup Cordelia Cruises. And Majesty of the Seas is still kind of a mystery. I think we assume at this point she is sold to some sort of a Greek shipping company that may just hold on to it until the industry kind of rebounds a little bit and the value for the ship is higher than when they bought it. Now, Empress of the Seas and Majesty of the Seas may have been sold as a result of COVID-19 and the pandemic, but their fates were pretty much sealed a little while earlier. Both Empress and Majesty were primarily doing cruises to Cuba. When Cuba opened up, Royal Caribbean actually brought back Empress of the Seas specifically for these Cuba sailings, and it seemed like a great idea because they needed small ships. Cuba's port infrastructure cannot handle larger ships, so they brought Empress back, they fine-tuned Majesty, and this was the perfect 1-2 punch to offer cruises to Cuba, and they did that for a little while. But when the borders to Cuba closed, these cruise ships were kind of without a purpose or a role, especially Empress of the Seas. And so the pandemic exacerbated the problem more than anything and hastened what would have otherwise been the selling of the ships to a buyer maybe later on. Regardless, we've got, of course, both ships out of the fleet, and they're still in operation, or at least they still exist. They're not scrapped yet, but they're not here anymore. Now, if we go back to the next couple ships that were sold, let's go back to Monarch of the Seas and Sovereign of the Seas. Both are Sovereign-class ships, sisters to the aforementioned Majesty of the Seas. Both of these ships were sold under different circumstances at a different time when the industry was still working. Royal Caribbean basically would sell cruise ships pre-pandemic for essentially when it made financial sense for them. In fact, in a lot of cases, Royal Caribbean would use some of its older ships to help supplement some of its other companies. Of course, Royal Caribbean International, who we talk about all the time, is one company within the Royal Caribbean Group. And Royal Caribbean Group owns different cruise lines, like Celebrity Cruises. You all know about that one, but you may not have known that Royal Caribbean Group also operated companies like Pullmantur Cruises and TUI Cruises and a couple of others. So the basic game plan for Royal Caribbean Group was when a brand new cruise ship entered the Royal Caribbean International fleet, to keep it kind of manageable, they would take out some of the older ships and either transfer them to other fleets that they operate or just simply sell them to another company altogether. So in the case of Monarch of the Seas and Sovereign of the Seas, both ships eventually made way for other newer ships and they were moved to Pullmantur Cruises. Well, unfortunately, Pullmantur Cruises was really hit hard with the pandemic. I talked about earlier that cruise lines had very little cash on hand during any given time. Well, when the shutdown occurred with Pullmantur, they were even more cash strapped than any other line, and they actually went completely under, declared bankruptcy, and as of right now has no signs of coming back. Meanwhile, they sold both of those ships, in fact, every ship in their fleet, to being scrapped. And so unfortunately, Monarch and Sovereign of the Seas are no longer with Royal Caribbean, and also no longer with us at all because they are now scrap metal. Now, if you go back even further, you've got 2 Vision-class ships, Legend of the Seas and Splendor of the Seas. And both of these were sold to UK-based Thomson Cruises, and this was a strategic selling of it. Richard Fain, who's the chairman and chief executive of the Royal Caribbean Group, said, quote, "The ship sails in line with our strategic objective of divesting ourselves of older hardware and keeps us firmly on the course to the double-double," end quote. The double-double was something that Royal Caribbean was doing on the financial side of things. Don't worry too much about it. But basically, when it made sense, they would sell their early hardware. And you have to remember, these early Vision-class ships had been eclipsed by even larger, more amenity-filled mega ships like the Oasis-class ships, and by today's standards, they were considered pretty much small ships. At 225,000 tons, Royal Caribbean's 4-year-old Allure of the Seas and sister Oasis of the Seas was more than 3 times larger than any of these Vision-class ships. And up until the pandemic, it looked like the Vision-class was slowly going to be sold off one by one. So, as I mentioned, Legend and Splendor gone, and actually there were plans already announced for Grandeur of the Seas to be transferred to Pullmantur, again, making way for some of the newer cruise ships like Odyssey of the Seas. Well, fast forward again, that Grandeur selling didn't actually occur, but in the case of Legend and Splendor, they are still with the fleet. Meanwhile, the rest of the Vision-class ships are still with Royal Caribbean. You've still got a couple left in there, Vision and Rhapsody of the Seas. And the good news is that they're going to be around at least for a little while longer. Right now, there is still no market for used cruise ships, and so cruise lines are going to hold on to these ships longer, perhaps even more than they'd like to, just simply because they have no other alternative. Scrapping cruise ships is an extremely low return on investment, so it's just not a really good idea unless you absolutely have to do it. And in this case right now, cruise ships have an opportunity to sail again, so I think Royal Caribbean is going to hold on to these Vision-class ships even more. Now, if you really want to go back and turn back the Wayback Machine to even further beyond any of these ships we've talked about, there are, of course, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 other Royal Caribbean ships that did exist before that have met different fates. And honestly, they were all sold and let go for the fleet for the exact same reasons that we talked about Sovereign of the Seas and Monarch of the Seas and Splendor of the Seas and Legend of the Seas. And that is, it just made sense for them to move on. Most major cruise lines would look at a cruise ship in a traditional sense as having about a 20 to 30 year lifespan, and then they would sell it to some other company. And this model slightly changed now with refurbishments and amplifications and all that, but nonetheless, that was the model. So we're talking about Song of Norway, Nordic Prince, Sun Viking, and Song of America, and the Viking Serenade. The Viking Serenade was scrapped in 2018. Song of America is still unoperational, actually, as the Celestial Olympa for Celestial Cruises. Sun Viking is still around as well. She's actually a floating casino called the Oriental Dragon, and that's operating over in China. Nordic Prince was scrapped in 2015, and Song of Norway was also scrapped in 2013 as the Formosa Queen. So, unfortunately, those ships are gone. Some of them are still around, but in the case of all these classic Royal Caribbean ships, their time came. They had been eclipsed by larger, newer, more modern cruise ships, and it made sense from a financial standpoint and a strategic standpoint for Royal Caribbean to divest them from the fleet and move in a different direction. It's sad, but at the end of the day, we have to remember cruises are a business first and foremost, and as much as we may love a ship, eventually, yes, they will sell every single ship in the fleet. It's just an inevitability. The question is when. And it's going to be kind of weird that someday, maybe 20, 30 years from now, we might see an Oasis-class cruise ship sailing for another company under completely different colors. It'll just be weird to see. I can't even imagine that. Let me know in the comments which of these ships you miss the most and which of these would you want to bring back from beyond the grave. Let me know in the comments below. Make sure you like this video by hitting the like button, subscribe to our channel, and turn on your notifications so that way YouTube lets you know when we have a brand new video to share. This has been Matt from RoyalCaribbeanBlog.com, and we'll talk again real soon.